Hello and welcome to 3S Recipes, Smart Shrinking Solutions, Fostering Resilient Cities in the Peripheries of Europe. This is the final conference of a 3-year-long project. We are recording this event for posterity and also for the viewers at home, 12 months from now, who will be bored of TV repeats and Netflix series, and then they will reach this video recording of our project event. I'll talk. We got a bit more time today for each of the presenters who've been courageous enough to turn up in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic. So I'll tell a longer story of how we've reached this stage in a sort of academic research points of view, and why this project has been what it is. So my particular story of doing research on shrinking cities that are losing population or have suffered some population loss, which I think is very prominent topic and growing discussion today. My story starts with the city of Glasgow. After I finished my doctorate, my first job was a research fellow at the University of Glasgow, working with Ivan Turok. Ivan is definitely listening to this now. And not far from my office, every day going to work, I saw this particular building, which is a B-listed building, Clydesdale Paintworks, which was in that particular derelict state. And that brought me to think about not just urban growth, which everybody was concentrating on, but also urban decline, and especially how population change and population decline manifests itself not just in economic trends, but also in the built environment. And I thought that's a symbol, perhaps, of Glasgow's past, maybe not of Glasgow's future. However, the city of Glasgow did suffer permanent population loss. It reached its peak just around the 1920s, and from around 1920s, it suffered a continuous decline until sort of early 2000s, when the European Union enlargement brought in more people from Eastern Europe in particular to the city of Glasgow. So Glasgow has a little bit of upturn from about 2005, but obviously you can see that the city is far away from 1.2 million or so that it had back 100 years ago. So working in that city, which is a vibrant and lovely place, despite the statistics, we started to look around sort of European trends of urban growth and decline. And with Ivan Turok, we produced this paper that became quite popular in niche circles, I must say. Quite popular because what we did, we tracked population changes across the entire European continent, from the Atlantic to the Urals, in all urban areas above 200,000 people. We introduced that threshold almost arbitrarily for the simplicity of data collection, and that threshold produced about 1,000 urban areas across Europe. We collected population data from around 1960, because before 1960, between the end of Second World War and 1960, every city in Europe were regrowing. Every city in Europe were increasing population. From 1960, we started to see a divergence of population trends. What we found out, although we were looking for kind of resurgence, we were looking for renaissance, we were looking for what the then new Labour government were introducing, the urban renaissance and the recovery of British cities. We were looking for resurgence. We found that only 14% of cities across the entire continent were recovering, regrowing, like Glasgow at the time. 30% of cities, almost every third city in Europe, were actually continuously growing from about Second World War until 2005, when the paper was finished. But the plurality, or the biggest share of cities back then, were actually shrinking. They were losing population. And on the map, all the dark kind of dots are the urban areas which are growing in the early 2000s, and the white dots are all the cities that were shrinking in the early 2000s. And you can obviously,
That's the other way around.
the growing ones are dark dots,
Really?
and the white ones are shrinking ones.
Okay.
Yeah. So, as you can see, the white shrinking dots are primarily sort of east of Berlin. Yeah, a lot of mostly Eastern European countries, and most of the dark dots are kind of Western Europe. So we decided then, with a group of colleagues who got interested in these trends, to sort of zoom in into some of the cities and see what is actually happening on the ground. It's nice to see kind of the big picture, but you need to zoom in into a smaller picture. And with the European Union funding, that was the Framework Program 7, FP7 project, for 3 years with colleagues at the UFZ in Leipzig, Environmental Research Center in Leipzig, and also colleagues across Europe. We studied a number of urban areas. We studied Liverpool, we've studied Genoa, we've studied Leipzig and Halle, we've studied Ostrava in Czech Republic, Bytom and Sosnowiec across the border in Poland, Timisoara in Romania, and we studied Donetsk and Makiivka in eastern Ukraine. All shrinking cities. Some were recovering at the time, 2009, 2012. Some were continuously declining, continuously losing population. So we've done some initial analysis of those cities and what manifestations of urban decline were there. And we've done some support, some interest from local stakeholders and regional governments. In particular in Poland, we had a very big conference back then in Katowice with a lot of regional and local authorities from Upper Silesia and Silesian region. We had a lot of interest obviously from Germany, and German scholars has been, of course, pioneers of urban shrinkage studies because they were the first to experience an incredible population loss after the reunification of Germany, when millions of people went to find jobs in the West. And of course, we've had a very good also turnout in Genoa with Italian stakeholders. We had not so much popularity among some cities in Donetsk and Makiivka, for example. We had some kind of success with stakeholders, but a lot of cities did not want to be grouped as shrinking cities because local authorities, mayors, would like to be associated with growth. They would like to claim that they are a growing city, they are a vibrant economy, and they are kind of going from strength to strength. Despite all the usual statistics, population that you can throw at them, there is still that kind of interest in avoiding being stereotyped as a declining city. So doing the research in these 10 cities originally, we've looked at try to sort of start to conceptualize, try to find the drivers of shrinkage. We've gradually understood that population decline and shrinkage as a term to be used as a sort of a more politically sensitive and more politically neutral term rather than decline. So shrinkage is a sort of non-single process, and also it is quite a peculiar beast because it manifests itself in different ways, but also it's driven by sometimes very different trends and different drivers. It has, in some places, it is associated with economic decline and deindustrialization and job-related out-migration when the industries of the old shut down and people looking for jobs elsewhere. A similar story across a lot of cities in the Northern Hemisphere. And potentially coming back to us. Also, population decline is driven in some places by actually growing wealth and prosperity of local population. The middle class families move out of cities to the kind of rural and suburban areas, and that change in the settlement pattern drives the shrinkage in the urban core, different from economic decline story. And of course we have places, and this is primarily a pan-European story, in which we have surplus of deaths over births. We have low or extremely low fertility rates across any European country, in every European city. And now, of course, we have problems of aging. So those three drivers were kind of in front of our agenda. We try to schematically put that into some sort of perspective, looking also at the longer trends, perhaps looking at from 1970s until kind of early 2000s. We've started to play with different types of representations, how to sort of conceptualize this. But of course, then we realized we need to add the more perhaps obvious drivers of shrinkage, those which are connected to natural disasters, hurricanes, tsunamis, earthquakes that devastate cities, and coronavirus, one of those natural environmental issues that we are facing now. We don't know how impactful that will be on population growth trends. And also, of course, we should not avoid wars. And speaking now in 2020, and being from Donetsk, you know, my home city has been affected dramatically by war, and it's probably now fair to say probably a third of its size as it was before the war. So we added those two extra drivers of shrinkage, the economic one, the demographic one, the suburban one, and also wars and, of course, natural disasters. And as I tell everyone, shrinkage is a very old process. It's been with us since at least the last days of Pompeii. And I think looking at the audience today in this conference, I think the last day of Pompeii is a good image. This is Karl Brylov, a famous Russian painter, painted this 1833 in 1833. The Russian Museum in St. Petersburg have the original, beautiful, incredible, powerful painting of the volcanic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 1979. So one of the causes of shrinkage, of course, of that city, which never recovered, as we know. So we published this research originally in 2014, called Conceptualizing Urban Shrinkage, with Annegret Hasse, Dieter Rink, Katrin Grossman, Matthias Berndt, and myself. Annegret couldn't come for the obvious reasons of German lockdown. Some other friends couldn't come for the obvious reasons of not able to reach British Isles by normal means. And finally, we've produced this sort of final conceptualization, a heuristic model, a model of how drivers of shrinkage, being economic decline, demographic change, suburbanization, political conflicts or natural hazards, how that impact on urban development at local scale, leaving us with population decline, and also producing a number of direct and indirect consequences of shrinkage. We mentioned aging already. Of course, we mentioned already the pictures of Glasgow underuse and vacant built environment, brownfields. In a lot of places, we are dealing with reinforced segregation of income groups or racial groups, unemployment, disinvestment in infrastructure, abandonment, tax deficits, fiscal crisis of cities that depend on residential income. So a lot of direct and indirect consequences are with us. And of course, what is important after we've done the analysis of the drivers of shrinkage is we found that what is interesting now, moving on from the analysis of the drivers, what's interesting is the governance and policies that have been implemented or not in each city, in each region, each country, how to deal and mitigate this. Policy decision making on multiple scales, multiple levels, and the acts of various agents and institutions, both within those cities and also external agents. So for the next sort of period of research, and this is where where 3S recipe comes in, we decided to look at the actual policies and responses. I need to add that it's important, and we always try to be cautious about a particular unfortunate trend in some of the urban studies, architecture and design disciplines of sort of almost beautifying or glamorizing urban decline. And there is this unfortunate term that some people invented to describe photo albums of abandoned, vacant, derelict places, of which there are dozens and dozens being produced, as ruined porn. A lot of people are buying expensively produced albums of Detroit, and here you have a few examples: American Ruin. You have the Ruin of Detroit, an intrinsic dereliction album. You have the Detroit Spectacular Ruin photo album of the Packard's plant, once originally the biggest automotive factory in the world. This was Detroit. Another ruin porn production. Beautiful, terrible ruins. Detroit and the Anxiety of Decline. And this is the book that tries to criticize, or at least try to sort of make a point how ruins acquire aesthetic value now, and how a particular dare I say middle class cohort of customers is admiring what some of us would probably not be willing to admire. Yeah. So we have to be very careful doing research in shrinking cities and non-shrinking cities to avoid that negative tendency, which I think is unfortunately with us. There have been some scholars who put this up front, who try to warn us about our actual ethical positioning versus studying shrinking cities. Bob Beauregard has been probably, for me, the most influential in terms of problematizing and also making the point that we need to position ourselves in a particular way, not to become one of those, as he described, voices of decline. We need to be careful to not become the messengers of doom and gloom, even in this particular moment, I think. So he mentioned in his book, which I do recommend to have a look at, republished the second edition 2002, Voice of Decline, the history of American obsession with shrinkage. He mentioned how urban decline is a politically powerful discourse, how it's been politically acquired by, in the American case, by Republican Party, based in more rural, conservative heartlands, versus more sort of leftist, inner city core urban dwellers, and how also it acquired unfortunate connections and anxieties about power of a country, and how a decline of a particular city is linked to sort of understanding of the nation's decline, and how that could be politically weaponized. So Bob Beauregard has been quite good in telling us and warning us about our own responsibilities in this. So here we come to the project that has been running for 3 years, from March 2017 until March 2020, which is today, and we try to unpack and uncover and reveal a somewhat different identity of shrinking cities that we've chosen, cities that are now castigated, left behind, places that don't matter, all those quite horrible labels that mass media have produced recently and attached to various places in northern England, in Wales, in Scotland, in Northern Ireland, and across Europe now, places which are kind of abandoned by the national power holders and now need to be sort of rekindled. So we try to actually look at those particular cities, and we've chosen 7 cities, and look at actually what's been happening in them, what they've tried to be doing for the last at least 20 years, how those cities and the local stakeholders and local residents, local businesses, local politicians, they say, how they've been dealing with the problems of population decline and what they've got to show. So our idea was to, and our sort of philosophy has been that learning from experience of the cities that once were on the edge of an abyss but have bounced back to life, and that by sharing the key ingredients of the success across Europe and beyond, we might help as many shrinking cities as possible to adapt, to transform, and help themselves to thrive in the face of continuously changing and often dramatically changing circumstances. They put the dramatically changing circumstances in 2017 before even the coronavirus outbreak. So I think we were slightly ahead of time. We had a fantastic group of people working with us. We had partners in France from École Normale Supérieure, geographers from French elite school, working on the city of Le Havre in Normandy. We had people, geographers and planners from the University of Amsterdam, working on the city of Maastricht in the Netherlands. We had geographers from the University of Lodz or Łódź in Poland, working on their home city of Łódź. We had a creative agency, an artist collective in Stoke-on-Trent, working in their home city. We had people from Western University of Timisoara, sociologists, urban sociologists working in Timisoara, and also with the help of the local non-government organization that deals with inter-ethnic dialogue and integration of various ethnic and also migrant communities in Western Romania. We had planners and engineers from the University of Porto working in their home city. And also we had a number of economic geographers from originally University Technology of Izmir and also from Middle East Technical University, who, despite the adversity of not being able to travel outside of Turkey because their passports were confiscated by the Turkish government after the botched coup attempt in 2016-17, they still managed to do the research on their homes on the city, shrinking city in Turkey, which is called Zonguldak. Zonguldak is here for those viewers at home who might struggle to find it on the map. So Zonguldak is on the Black Sea coast of Turkey. Timisoara is in West Romania. Łódź is actually very central in Poland, but it is not far from Warsaw, so there is a growth shadow effect influencing there. Maastricht is a very small enclave of Limburg province, almost within Belgium, but it is in Netherlands. Stoke-on-Trent is in central England. Le Havre is Normandy, and Porto is in northern Portugal. So we had those 7 cities, 9 partners, including University of Birmingham, geographers, planners, engineers, and the project has been run from University of Oxford with the generous support of JPI Urban Europe, the Joint Program Initiative Urban Europe, which is an agency that's pulling resources from various research funding councils to have joint projects. We've structured the research in such a way that we would address those 3 major drivers of shrinkage. The economic decline, the industrialization one, the demographic change and low fertility one, and of course the suburbanization and sort of urban sprawl one. So we've structured the project to look at the 3 dimensions or 3 themes of how urban economy and municipal finance cope with shrinkage, how connected and compact those cities could be to fight urban sprawl and to fight the flight of the affluent residents, and how attractive and livable those cities can become, not only to increase population fertility levels, but also maybe to attract other people, migrants from other cities or maybe even from abroad. So those 3 themes, 3 major drivers of shrinkage, were tackled through different, those 3 particular themes that we looked at. We also decided to adopt a long-term perspective, looking at those 7 cities over the last 20 years, so the 21st century shrinkage and the policies, but also we wanted to leave a legacy that could outlast the project and outlast the crisis of coronavirus, and hopefully be useful for the next 25-40 years by testing each of the initiatives, policies, projects that these cities introduced over the last 20 years, testing their resilience to the changes that might happen in the future. To do that, we have attempted to use a civil engineering methodology which was developed at the University of Birmingham, including some of the co-investigators on the project. Chris Rogers was one of the authors of this big study Designing Resilient Cities, A Guide to Good Practice. They've developed an urban future methodology, quite a methodical step-by-step approach to testing each of the solutions that we might be offered. So we try to use that methodology through the project by looking at the solutions, smart shrinkage solutions that the cities might have produced and the intended benefits that they might have had. Looking then at the necessary conditions that need to be in place for that solution, and in particular for those intended benefits to appear, and also then testing those solution benefit pairs versus the 4 scenarios of the future. I'll mention the 4 scenarios in a moment, but the idea of the method and idea of our application of the method would be to produce and implementable, robust solutions, implement and adapt those solutions that are more vulnerable to the future, and also perhaps force the local stakeholders to have a longer-term view of what they've been doing. Putting people in the room and thinking long-term, I think, is one of the best things that we've done, according to a lot of people and the feedback we have received. The 4 futures which the project has been tested the solutions for are a very broad possibilities of how the global society, the global urban society, will develop over the next 40 years. One of these paradigms, one of these future scenarios is based on sort of sustainability ethos. The other one is based on a more state interventionist policy reform agenda. The third urban future scenarios is based on a free market future in which market forces operate at will. And the final 4th scenario, which is becoming increasingly prominent today, the fortress world, in which the world is actually now deglobalized, and each city is now locked down, and inability of travel is reinforced by forces of enforcement, by police and by the army. So those, it looked quite a far-fetched scenario 3 years ago, but as a lot of people nodding in this room today, it looks apparently quite a possibility. So I just mentioned briefly how these 4 scenarios work. So the new sustainability paradigm is based on human behavioral change and political change and ideological change that is based on us understanding and valuing equity, equality, and sustainability. So it's a green paradigm, effectively, in which one planet living is taken on board by most of the population, and people care for a shared vision and for sustainable living and a much improved quality of life, but not at the expense of the future generations. Yeah. So in the new sustainability paradigm, new socioeconomic arrangements result in changes to the character of the industrial or urban civilization. In this particular urban future, local is valued more than global, local production is valued more than foreign trade, and the new sustainability paradigm calls for a revised model of economic development and active engagement of citizens in the production of this. It dates back maybe to Mill's 1848 writings, John Stuart Mill's, the English philosopher, and it's been now taken on board primarily politically by green parties across the world. Not only green parties, I dare to say, but green parties take it out as the main sort of ideology. The policy reform is a more sort of social democratic interventionist policy in which people do still behave the way they behave, and they do still value individual freedoms and also wealth, but the state enforces some kind of solutions and some sort of limitations on that, fighting perhaps climate change by diktat, trying to reduce some poverty, trying to increase environmental sustainability, and sort of mitigate some of the worst examples of high inequality and sort of damaging the environment. Consumerism, individualism still is the main ideology, but the state takes the role of making change through policy reforms. Perhaps 1930s Great Depression period is when kind of social liberal and social democratic agenda associated with John Maynard Keynes came forward, and probably you would say that the balance between economic growth and greater equality is coming from that sort of period. So that's the second paradigm that we've looked at. The third one is market forces. A free market society, self-correcting logic of competitive markets prevail. The current situation in most countries continue with major companies running the show. Competitive, open markets, global trade, and very little concerns for social and environmental problems. You might say this comes back to the Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, 1776. Effectively, the key driver of these market forces, urban future, is competitive open global trade and unfettered markets. This is the urban future that most participants in our workshops identified with very easily, because in most countries we're dealing with free market until now has been probably the prevalent code of practice. The fourth one is Fortress World. It is a world in which powerful individuals, groups, organizations develop an authoritarian response to threats of resource scarcity, of social breakdown, forming alliances to protect themselves in their enclaves of the wealth. Security and defensibility of resources, food, water supplies are protected and they're paramount for the privileged rich elites. Toilet rolls are rationed, but given in huge quantities in rich enclaves. Ventolin supplies are regulated, but not for everyone. So policy and regulation exists in the forces world, but the enforcement is limited, and the armed forces and police are there to impose order on the impoverished masses and protect the environment and prevent social collapse for the benefit of the wealthy few. It is a horrible picture that dates back to the Leviathan of Thomas Hobbes, 1655, who developed this portrayal of a dystopian world in which every man for himself. And that time, of course, it was man. So we tried to look at a particular solution that each of the 7 cities offered to us, and we tried to look how those solutions would work in these 4 different futures. And the solution that might have more resilience to these different changes is probably the solution that might be more beneficial and more adoptable. So that's sort of the idea. The original Urban Futures methodology has been based on an interactive tool, online technique in which you go through all the steps methodically by putting up identifying every sustainability solution and its intended benefits at step 1, then looking at the necessary conditions for that solution to be implemented. Then at step 3, looking how we can determine the performance of these necessary conditions in the future. Then at step 4, we have to determine the resilience of the sustainability solution benefit pair to future change. And when we determine that, then we look at our options, so whether we adopt this particular solution because it is good. Maybe we are looking at changing a particular solution in light of all these steps, and maybe we can abandon this particular solution because it's not really resilient to the changes that we have. In our case, the British case study was based on the city of Stoke-on-Trent, which is becoming a really a hotbed of creative arts and designers. And this is a new trend of artists to develop images based on industrial heritage that the Peripheries have. We've run 3 workshops in Stoke-on-Trent, looking at economic and financial problems, looking at compactness and connectedness of the city, and looking at its livability and attractiveness. Run with our partners and BArts and University of Birmingham as well, and with the really fascinating group of local stakeholders. We've been working through the steps. We've adopted the methodology in a way that we had face-to-face workshops in physical contact, not social distancing, but getting closer and closer to each other. And we've also developed, made a decision to go through the first 2 steps only of the original method, and to complete the rest steps in the office of academics. For the original method requires entire days, if not weeks, to be spent in one room, which is not entirely feasible by local stakeholders. It's amazing how many different exciting projects each of the cities have offered. This is a list of just one particular workshop in Stoke-on-Trent. This one, the livability and attractiveness question that we've been dealing with, and the local stakeholders produced a whole range, enormous range of different successful projects, policy interventions that the city has implemented over the last 20 years. We asked people to vote on the best, and we kind of made a hierarchy of these votes. The most successful, most popular solutions then were dealt with at a later stage of the project. We look at the benefits, the intended benefits of each of these solutions. We look at the necessary conditions for those benefits to take place, and then later on we looked at the resilience to the urban future scenarios. So this is some of the images from the Stoke-on-Trent workshop. This is some of the images, people struggling with the solutions in Timisoara as well. You can see we managed, by using this engineering methodology, we managed to have 7 research groups working in unison, working on a similar kind of level. Each of these solutions then were sort of graded and checked against these 4 scenarios. Some of the solutions worked quite well in the new sustainability paradigm, although they had some missing ingredients. Some of the solutions worked mediocre in most other scenarios. Some of the solutions didn't have necessary conditions in other scenarios. So effectively, each of the policy solutions and the policy brief that we produced in the end provide the local stakeholder and the reader, any reader that can see, with a number of options. At least everybody is warned how resilient this solution could be to the future, and everybody can then adopt or abandon a particular solution if they so wish. This particular case was based on the Smithfield Central Business District redevelopment in Stoke-on-Trent, for example. This is an example. Our project has been run with the consortium meetings every 6 months. We started as a kickoff. This is we are struggling. You can see the pain on the participants' faces, struggling with the urban futures methodology in the original workshop in Brussels in May 2017. We had 2 flip charts and also a screen to help us. We are struggling here in Timisoara. You can see one of the workshops as well, looking at the color grids and the original meetings. Second meeting after Brussels, we went to city of Łódź, and this is some of the participants of that meeting in Łódź. The third meeting we had 6 months from that was in Maastricht. This is Maastricht City Hall, Town Hall, with local stakeholders, regional governments as well, not only the municipal governments. And we had quite a good participation from local stakeholders. Some of them followed us from Maastricht onwards until now. The next meeting we had was in Porto, in Portugal. Happy days, sunny, sun hats, glasses. Great meeting. We had also good participation from local deputy mayors and such. The next meeting was in Le Havre. It's probably the largest grouping we've had. We had the whole delegation from Zonguldak, including the mayor of Zonguldak, of Turkish city that we're dealing with. We had also good representation from our East Asian friends from Japan. Before we have our friend in China as well. A big delegation from Turkey here. And all the other partners were present in Le Havre in France. That was followed by a meeting in Timișoara in Romania in the autumn of 2019. And that journey kind of took us to Birmingham and Stoke-on-Trent now 17th of March. So the idea is that what we try to achieve is to know and to learn how a shrinking city of relatively modest size, 200 to 600,000 people, located always in a peripheral position vis-a-vis the nation capitals or bigger cities, how they could rebuild a growing economy, how they could sort of solidify its financial fiscal base, municipal finance base. We also learned how a shrinking city can create a more compact, connected urban environment to prevent environmental damage by passenger transport in particular for the remaining inhabitants, and of course improve air quality. And also we've looked at how cities can improve their attractiveness and foster vibrant local communities and neighborhoods in those 7 cities. For this final event we've produced 22 policy briefs, 3 policy briefs of 3 smart shrinking solutions for each of the 7 cities, with Stoke-on-Trent having 4 policy briefs because the local stakeholders could not hold to the best solution, so we have 2 best solutions for urban attractiveness. So 22 policy briefs will be uploaded, are present now, but will be uploaded on the website, in which this film will also be uploaded, and we will be asking all the local stakeholders to translate those policy briefs in their local national languages so that also they're available to the local and national policy-making bodies in their local language. And we'll try to showcase these smart shrinking solutions produced by Stoke-on-Trent, by Le Havre, by Maastricht, by Łódź, Timișoara, Zonguldak and Porto. We'll try to showcase from now onwards in various international meetings, which will hopefully be restarted 12 months from now, although I could be very optimistic. So thanks a lot for watching, and tune back. We'll be coming back to service after change of the microphone. Thank you.